Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Freya. I hope you are having a great day. So, as you can see from the title, today I'm going to talk about being a writer. So you want to be a writer. What do you need to know? What do you need to learn? We're going to talk about genres, consistency, not being hard on yourself, writing ideas down, the difference between different types of drafts, world building, plotting, characters, character arcs, representation, and diversity. Also, we're gonna also be talking about timelines later. That's what we're gonna be talking about. It's a lot. So we're just gonna get started. So firstly, I want to say that this is coming from somebody who has been writing pretty casually. I have followed a creative writing course at my local arts academy for 2 years. 3 years ago, so I stopped this year, but I did it the year before that and before that. And I learned a lot over there, and I thought I'm really passionate about writing, and so I really wanted to share that information with you guys because it's something I'm really passionate about, and I think I can have a bit of I can give some input. I write pretty casually, but I am planning to publish my book, and right now I'm working on my second draft, so just so you know where I'm kind of at my writing journey, and what my perspective is. So also, I write fantasy. I've been writing since I was 11, and I've been wanting to become a writer since I was 11. Also, this advice is probably going to be a lot more applicable if you also write fiction as I do. Like if you write non-fiction, this video isn't gonna be for you. Also, like stories that are based on true events are also not gonna be this applicable here. I will explain that a bit later as well, but obviously the first tips you can keep in your mind or something. Consistency. You want to write regularly. So I've been writing for like 4 years probably now, like pretty on with it, and on the same story for like 4 years about that, and a year and a half ago I started writing every day, and I did that for at least a few months, and I went from like 10 pages to 30 pages just over a few months, and then I even got to 80 pages A4. You want to write regularly. Set some time apart every day or every 3 days or every week to that time that is just reserved for writing. Even if you just sit there for 30 minutes staring at your cursor, you've sat there and you've written. Even if you haven't written anything, you're writing. So there are some days I write half an hour every day, by the way. There are some days where I just write 2 lines, and there are some days where I write a whole page in one go. So yeah, that's something you really want to keep in mind, that you're not always gonna write as much as the other days, and your your productivity isn't always gonna be the same, and that's okay. You just gotta be able to really set that time for yourself so your mind can adjust and can really get into that creative flow to be able to get some ideas down. So now, don't be hard on yourself, because this is really important. If you ask for a critique of somebody, like you let somebody read your work and they say this sentence is weird, this doesn't really make sense, I don't understand this, it's not because your writing is bad, it's because they are giving you a critique, and you really need to distance yourself from that writing and just know when to get better, and that your writing is gonna get better. Your first writing is probably not gonna be as good as your most recent writing, and that's totally okay. That's what rewriting is for. And so definitely, if you have that critiquing, don't take it personally, and try to just learn from it, Write amazing ideas down. So probably you're gonna have a time where you're standing in the grocery store and all of a sudden you think, oh, this would fix that plot hole that I've been dealing with, or this would be an amazing idea for this character to grow, or this would be such a cute scene between these two characters. You want to write those ideas down. Have a notebook on you, take the notes in your phone, and just keep track of those great ideas, because you will forget them. And so you don't want to do that, you know, you don't want to forget your amazing ideas, so make sure that you can write them down. So now we're gonna get a bit more into the technical things, where I'm happy that we got the first stuff over with. Firstly, we've got genres. You really want to know what kind of genre you want to write. The difference between the genre that you want to read and there could be a difference between the genre you want to read and the genre you like to write. And so it's important to know what kind of story you want to tell. So a few genres that are you know, there are fantasy, sci-fi, horror, thrillers, detectives, stuff like that. You pretty much want to just say, what kind of story do I want to write and what genre is that in. This is gonna be really easy to just determine, because it's just really a quick decision. If you've got the question, well, where do I start? Just start somewhere. The first lesson of my creative writing course, she was like, just write something. And I wrote something about this girl who went through a portal, and then a boy who also followed her through this portal, and they emerged in this new world. And that's where a story can happen. That's where a story can just emerge. And that's the first thing you want to do. You want to write a scene. So a scene is one action that takes place in one place, on one time, with the same characters. That's what a scene is. And so you want to start writing just one scene, and you can see where it goes from there. If that scene happens to be at the end of your book, that's okay. If that happens to be at the beginning of your book or somewhere in the middle of your story, that's okay. You just gotta start with one scene, and then you can figure out what happened before this and what's gonna happen after this. That's completely fine. You don't always need to know what's gonna happen or what has happened already. You just need to write. That's the point. You really just need to write. So now know the difference between your first draft and your later drafts. So your first draft it's gonna be a mess. It's gonna be all over the place. You're gonna write so many weird things in there. You're gonna have scenes that make no sense with the story. You're gonna have weird characters in there, and that's totally okay. Your first draft is meant to be for you, for the author. And you're also probably gonna have a lot of plot holes, loopholes, things you haven't explained that the reader does not understand, but you do, because you know how this world works. You need to really understand that the reader is gonna only read what's on the pages. Everything else you understand about the races in your world, the architecture in your world, the cultures of your world, the way these two characters express themselves, how they interact, they will only see what's written down. And so you really need to make sure that all the information that you want to present to your readers is there. And that's the point of your later drafts. Like, as I said, I'm working on a second draft right now, and the main thing that I've been trying to add is just angst and spice. Angst and spice. I just want to spice it all up, make the tension between characters a lot bigger, make the tension in general a lot stronger, and to create a lot more yearning and, you know, stuff like that. Things that will make the story interesting, things that will make the story intriguing, and that's something you really want to do. That's something that's nice, it's interesting for your readers to read. You don't always want to just, you know, info dump. It's kind of annoying. I've seen it I've read the Akatar, and in one of the later books, I think the third, there's like this whole info dump about the history of these other characters, and it was a lot. I have no idea what was written there. And you don't want to do that, so you don't want to info dump. You want to be able to get this information just calmly throughout the story. So in your first draft, you're probably gonna info dump a lot about this one character. You're gonna info dump about the way a scene works, about the way these people talk to each other, about the way the characters interact, the way they speak. You're probably gonna info dump a lot, and you're gonna write weird sentences and weird grammatical orders, and you want to fix that in the later things, so you don't want to have to worry about it while you're doing your first draft. However, there are a few things that can help you with your later drafts, so you don't have to do as much work in your second or third draft. You can make sure that you incorporate a lot of the senses into a scene to make sure that it's vibrant, that it's alive. And you also want to spice up your dialogue. You can say, "Are you hungry?" she said. "No, I already ate," he said. Or you could say something like, "She offered him a plate of sandwiches. You hungry?" He made a denying gesture. "No, I already ate." That's something that's gonna be a lot more interesting to read, and so that's something you wanna maybe already incorporate in your first drafts to already make it easier for you in your later drafts, because in your later drafts you're going to want to keep track of the story and the way the whole presents itself, and in the first drafts you just want to write down everything that happens and so you don't want to have to work on these nitty-gritty details in your later drafts. Right now, I'm actually doing this thing where I have my first draft open, I have my second draft open, and I just type over everything. I don't copy-paste anything, because that's what I've been trying to do before this, and now I've done it this way, and it's been so much faster. If I think a sentence is weird, I just change it, and I don't have the chance to even miss a sentence, because I have to write it. I have to, copy it by hand. So now let's talk about world building. Obviously, world building is gonna be okay, let me first define what world building is. So world building is the act of making your world alive. It's about thinking about the architecture, the cultures in your world, what type of world is it, what type of people live there, what type of animals live there, what type of creatures, what type of ethnicities are there. Those are things you want to think about when world building. But also, you don't want to get stuck on world building. Your world building will come naturally when you write your story. When characters interact with each other, they will automatically tell something about the world building. When they walk into a room and they talk about how what the room looks like, or when they see a new creature somewhere walking around, they will automatically tell something about the world building. So you don't really need to think about that. Also, something that has to do with the world building is social hierarchies, the way money works, the way religion works, social classes, stuff like that. But that, yet again, that will come naturally if you just keep writing your story. And so you really shouldn't worry about it that much. So, now the next thing is plotting. So the plot is everything that happens throughout your story in chronological order. So obviously your story could be out of chronological order. You could have some flashbacks, you could have some flash forwards, you could have that your character talks about, well, that didn't work out, but you'll see that eventually. You can have skips in times. So that's how your story is, but that's not really your plot. Your plot is everything that happens throughout a story. So you could do plotting through like in chapter blah 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 this happens, in chapter blah 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 this happens, but yet again what I've figured out for me is that that doesn't work. When I'm writing, I have been at a point where I've been writing at 5 different points in time, and I know these are all from the same timeline, these are all from the same story, same world, same characters, but they just haven't met each other yet, and they're not in the right place yet, so I don't know how I'm gonna weave all of these pieces of story together, but I know that they do belong together. And so how are we gonna do that? And that's a bit where timelines and plotting gets together. So mostly I just ignore plotting. I would just ignore plotting, honestly, especially in your first book. You don't want to have to think about what's the logical order of events, or like what's the logical order in which you want to tell stuff. You want to mostly think about what's happening with which characters, and then you want to figure out in what order you're going to tell it to your readers. That's a bit about timelines. You can do different types of timelines. You can do like a chapter where it's from one perspective of one character, and then it's a perspective of another character, and then we're the first one and then the second one, and so on. That's something you could do. You could also just do a linear timeline where it's just one character that's the main character all this time. You could also just switch in time, like have one character from the future and a character from the past, and see how that like interacts with each other and how cool that could be. But you could also if you want to talk about time travel, that's gonna make your timeline a lot interesting. So just that's something I quickly wanted to mention, just, you know, that's gonna happen. So now I want to talk about characters and character arcs. So a character arc is the way a character changes throughout a story, the way the story influences the character's identity and the way they are and the way they interact with other characters. You've probably heard a few of these character arcs already, like a redemption arc, a hero to villain arc, a villain to hero arc. Obviously when I say stuff like that, you're also gonna have enemies to lovers, and that's, you know, the interpersonal arcs that you have. Friends to lovers, childhood friends to lovers, lovers to strangers, lovers to enemies, you know, spice things up. So those are the different arcs that you can have between characters, and it's really interesting to at least acknowledge how is this character gonna change. Because if you have this one scene and then you have this other scene, and you know these scenes coming this order, but this character has to change and something has to happen for the story to be able to continue. And so that's where those character arcs come in. That's quickly character arcs. Okay, now I want to talk a bit about character flaws, because your character is obviously gonna have a lot of qualities and a lot of identity and a lot of but also a lot of flaws, and you're gonna want to write authentic characters, and every person has their flaws. But the thing is, a character flaw is not a flaw unless it stops them from doing something. Like if somebody is suspicious all the time, if somebody's paranoid all the time, that's a character flaw until it actually comes in handy and somebody's trying to betray them. That's a bit the tension between character flaws and, you know, just character qualities. So now I want to talk about representation and diversity in characters or in world building. I've already tried to film this video once before, but I couldn't really get my ideas out, so I tried it again. And now we're going to talk about representation and diversity. Okay, so this has to do with queer people, with people of color, with disabled people, what are you also gonna have? With religion. Yeah, so firstly we're gonna talk a bit about world building because that's a bit easier. So when you're writing a book, and again this is coming from somebody who writes fantasy, so basically all of the characters, all of the world building that I'm doing is my own. It's not based on anything. It's not I mean, it is a bit based on anything, but most of it is from my imagination. I think that an author has a type of duty to their audience to properly represent and represent diverse characters and a diverse world. So I don't want to hear y'all talking, because even if you have a fantasy world that's very Tolkien-ish, I don't want to hear it. You're gonna have diverse characters in your world because a world is naturally diverse. Otherwise, you're not gonna have an authentic world, you're not gonna have a realistic world. If that's what you're going for, I guess, I can't tell you what to do, but you probably want to write a realistic story and a story that can appeal to a lot of audiences, and so you want to write a diverse world. Even if you write, there are also always gonna be diverse characters and diverse plot lines in your story, and so you really want to do that right. But how do you do this representation right? Because as a white person, I cannot write about the experiences of a black person properly. I cannot do that authentically, and it would be wrong for me to do so, because if I would be making money on that story, I would make money on the suffering of other people, and I would exploit a marginalized community for my benefit, and that's not cool. You don't want to do that, especially when writers have such a big impact on their audience and the way they view the world, because a story really can change the way you look at the world. And so you want to make sure that you do it right, and that if you do diverse characters, if you put in diverse characters, which I think you should, you can do it properly. Okay, so I have no idea where this camera stopped, but I was talking about, so on the one hand you have One Day at a Time, stories that deal with what it's like to be part of a marginalized community, and then stories that just happen to have a diverse characters in them. And for this example is The King Chronicles by Rick Riordan, which features two siblings, and they're mixed, and one of them is a lot darker than the other, but the story is not about them, about the difference between them, or about him experiencing more racism. It's mentioned like that when he was from the point where he was 11 and up, that the people at the airport were looking at him suspiciously because he was a black kid. It's mentioned, but it's not the focal point of the story. And so that's just a story that happens to have diverse characters in it, and here you have a diverse story. And so those diverse stories should only be told by those diverse people themselves. A story with where the lesbian romance is the focal point of the story should only be written about by a lesbian. The story about the struggles of what it's like to be a person of color should only be written by a person of color. Or just in general, it doesn't always have to be about struggles or racism or discrimination. It can also just be, as a white person, I cannot properly, authentically write a story about what it's like to be a black man in America. I cannot do that. So I shouldn't write that story, and I should let the black men in America write those stories. As not a part of those marginalized communities and thus having a little more privilege, I should let those stories be written by those people. And then on this side, so this side is basically what anybody can do. Anybody can write stories with diverse characters in them. Anybody can write stories with black characters in them, with gay characters in them, with trans characters in them, with disabled characters in them. But unless they are disabled, unless they are gay, unless they are trans themselves, they cannot write a story about where the focal point is that transness, is that is the way to deal with this disability, is the way how to move around in the world as a disabled person. Like, anybody not from that marginalized community cannot do that, so they shouldn't do that. Obviously, it's a bit of a different story when we're talking about stories that are based on true events, because they're the author of the story, the person who wrote it all down doesn't really matter. It's the story of this one person who lives in real life and has gone through these things. So that's a kind of a different story. I'm really talking about fictional characters and fictional worlds. So yeah, One Day at a Time should have been written by Latino characters. Excuse me. One Day at a Time should have been written by by Latino writers, Rick Riordan, and his diverse characters, because he's really great at putting a lot of diversity in his books, especially now compared to his Percy Jackson. It's actually pretty funny how much he's changed his diversity game over the years, and it's really great to see it. So yeah, I hope this was a bit clear and that you feel a bit motivated. Yeah, subscribe, give this video a like if you liked it. And yeah, I will see you someday soon.